Ciao, everyone, and welcome to Spazio, a monthly series that will highlight Italy's enduring role in the space ecosystem. I am Kelli Kedis Ogborn, your host, and to all of our viewers all over the world, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today is episode 2, where we will dive into the long-standing and notable relationship between the Italian Space Agency, also known as ASI, and NASA. And who better to have in this discussion than two pillars of the agencies representing both past and present? I'm extremely honored to welcome two of my guests to this discussion. Joining me today is the Honorable Dan Goldin, who has a relentless passion and belief that anything is possible. He is an architect of the faster, better, cheaper business model, noted as an entrepreneurial and scientific visionary, and he has the distinction of serving as NASA's longest tenured administrator from 1992 to 2001, reporting to three US presidents, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush. He is credited with the reemergence of NASA through one of its most challenging times after the Cold War, where he diplomatically fostered East-West international cooperation in space and oversaw the redesign, construction, and initial operation of the International Space Station, which was a $120 billion endeavor. He also guided the initial concept for the James Webb Space Telescope, which we all got to recently benefit from almost a year ago when the first jaw-dropping images were released. Mr. Goldin is a highly sought-after leader in advancing American technologies and businesses, and also led the early revolution of commercializing the space industry and transforming the American space business model to engage more actively with private sector partners. Currently, he is the founder of Cold Canyon, which is an innovation advisory firm, a senior advisor to Cerberus Capital Management, and is the 2023 General James E. Hill Lifetime Space Achievement Award recipient, presented this past April at Space Symposium. Dan, thank you for joining us today.
An honor to be here. Thank you so much.
It's our honor too. And also joining me today is Nunzia Paradiso, who is the head of the Extra European Bilateral and Multilateral Relations Office within the Italian Space Agency's International Affairs Directorate. She is also the Italian delegate to the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, the ESA International Relations Committee, and the ESA Science Program Committee. She joined ASI in 2016 after a notable career with postings at places to include the European Center for Space Law at the European Space Agency in Paris, the European Space Policy Institute in Vienna, and the European Union Satellite Center in Madrid. She is a graduate of Sapienza University of Rome with a bachelor's degree in contemporary history and a master's degree in international relations, where her final thesis focused on the 1979 Moon Agreement. After university, she also attended an Italian master course on space institutions and policies at the Italian Society for International Organization. Nunzia, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm very honored to represent ASI together with an iconic symbol of the American space sector, Dan Goldin. Very glad to be here. Thank you.
Yes, well, we're happy to have you. And the word iconic is actually a perfect way to start this off because there is so much to highlight here between the two institutions of ASI and NASA, and really many flagship and impactful programs that have been developed and executed over the decades. In our first episode that we did, I talked to Massimo Comparini from Thales Alenia, and we really talked about Italy's heritage from being the third country to launch a satellite into space in 1964 to the volumes of activities conducted for the ISS. And as you both know, Italy was one of the first signatories to the International Space Station and the third nation after the US and USSR to orbit an ISS element. So there's a lot of history, a lot of framework, and I really want to start by unpacking this foundational relationship. So Nunzia, I want to start with you, and then I'll transition to Dan, but I would love to know from your perspective a little bit of history about the creation of ASI in 1988, with a particular focus on the agency's goals and why participating in the ISS and aligning with NASA was and still is important.
Well, the creation of ASI, of the Italian Space Agency in 1988, was the result of a process that started years before. it was a way to respond to the need of a more coherent management of Italian space activities, more efficient way to have best return of in investment in the space sector. Allow me to recall that the Italian space activities developed along two parallel but different paths. The one in cooperation with the European countries that led to the creation of the first European space organization, and then in 1975 of the European Space Agency. And on the other side, in cooperation with the United States. And this led to the launch of the first Italian satellite in 1964 from a US-based Wallops Island, and then to the cooperation and the creation of the San Marco launching site in Malindi in Kenya, and all the rest. So there were different activities conducted by different actors. And so because there was the creation of the European Space Agency, there was a need for a better way to compete with the other European countries. So there was also this necessity to rationalize all the different activities going on and different sources of funding. So in 1979, Italy established the first 5-year national space plan. But already since its inception, there was the intention to find a better solution for the management of national space activities. You know, the national space plan was temporarily entrusted to the National Research Council, which was a pretty rigid organization and already dealing with many other fields of science, etc. So the intention was to create a more agile, flexible, focused entity dealing with not only European space activities, but also the cooperation with NASA that was growing very, very, very much. So that brought to the creation in 1988 of the Italian Space Agency.
No, it's a great history. And I think it's an important distinction because you talk about Italy's engagement, obviously, with Europe, but this need to pull into more of a globalist perspective and cooperation. And Dan, I think what's interesting, and you know this better than anyone, but you really heralded NASA at a very interesting time geopolitically, to say the very least. And you had this big task of bridging gaps and mending relationships and really fostering this new era of international collaboration in space. So I'm curious from your perspective, when looking for partners, especially with the ISS, why Italy? What made them a prime choice and a valuable partner to you?
Well, a little background data before we get to your question. First, I spent almost my entire career developing defenses and weapons aimed against the Soviet Union. This is what I did. I ran an organization with close to 10,000 people and billions of dollars that dealt in defense and space. So here I was. The Cold War ended in December 31st. The Soviet Union became the Russian Federation of 1991. And 3 months later, I was sworn in as NASA administrator. So it was kind of cultural shock.
An about face.
And one of the first things the president did is he said, Dan, I want you to meet with Boris Yeltsin, who'll be coming here on June 6th of 1992, and figure out how to take the shuttle to the Mir space station. He was a very wise man. He understood what happened at the end of World War I in the Versailles Treaty, when the Western powers did not treat Germany very well. And then we had bad times. So that was the beginning of my entry into it. Now, second, background. I grew up in a neighborhood of Eastern Europeans and Italians.
Okay.
So on Saturdays, you could smell onions cooking, and Sundays, you could smell garlic from all the houses. And I have an affinity for the Italian people because many of my childhood friends were Italian, and I even know a little bit of Italian. Okay, now, in answer to your question, the Italians are so easy to work with. They're a happy people.
They
They're
are.
brilliant. They're brilliant. They reach out. They're creative, and I spent disproportionate time with the Italians because they came with things. We didn't have to pull it out of them. No, it was just and later on we'll get into some of the names and the characters and things, but basically the Italians are creative. They reach out. They want to work with other countries, and they're really smart.
Absolutely. Well, and I'd love for you to touch on some of the engagement because they are now, I think, responsible for about 40 to 50% of the habitable volume of the ISS. But who were some of the names and the players? What were some of the things that you asked of them, and how did that evolve over the decades?
The player that I worked with early on in the middle was Romano Prodi. Uh, um, he and I and then also there was Antonio Ridotta. So it made it real easy because the an Italian was head of ESA, and then I had an Italian president of ASI to work with.
Hmm.
So we were able to do a lot of things, and one of the things we needed was the pressurized space from Harmony and Tranquility.
Hmm.
And the other thing that was really important is we needed a cupola. So instead of the astronauts being contained within the pressurized vessel, they could look out down at the Earth through glass.
Yeah.
And the Italians provided the cupola, which is a very major element of the station. It improves the quality of life for the astronauts, and it helps the continuous research. Because looking at TV pictures from cameras outside the station isn't the greatest. And there are a broad range of other things, but I very clearly remember the negotiations for these very important things, and it wasn't part of the initial design. It happened after we did the initial design. And this is what I liked about the Italians. You ask them to do something, and they, jump an inch and they jump a foot, and we had those pressurized areas.
Listening to this story, I've read something written by Italian engineers working in this space project at that time, and they first told me that when they start their career, they were very young, and they learned everything about management of a huge space project from the United States. The incredible friendship that were already existing between engineers in Italy and engineers in the United States allowed for these special relations, as we can call it, between engineers from the sides of the Atlantic. And so they learned how to manage a space program. That was a capacity that was not in the Italian hands at that time. So they grew up with the United States in this sense. And then there was the incredible experience working on aboard the shuttle, the collaboration of that time. And thanks to the incredible heritage that Italy gained with the Space Lab laboratory aboard the shuttle, they could propose and be proactive in the construction and building of the new Freedom Station. That was the space station Freedom at the beginning, and then, as Dan Goldin said, at the end of the Cold War with the Russian, the space station Alpha at the beginning. So,
No, I wanted to name it Space Station Alpha.
oh, okay, so it wasn't me.
And Bill Shepard, who was the first commander of the space station and still a very close friend of mine, we came up with the term Space Station Alpha because it would be Alpha, Beta, Gamma,
Oh, yeah.
Delta, and how should I say it? The politics in America. I won a lot of battles, but I lost the battle. because it ended up with a bureaucratic name, International Space Station. That is not inspiring. But Station Alpha, thank you for recollecting it, because that was a pretty ugly set of discussions we had. And every time I see Bill Shepard, he brings it up. Get on the phone, and he has some very bad words to say about the people who stopped Space Station Alpha.
Was it at least internally called Space Station Alpha or referred to as Alpha?
No, you do not violate rules.
Yeah,
No, no, no. Let me
it's true. It's
explain.
true.
When you're dealing with human lives, you have to live by a set of rules.
Yeah,
And even on little indiscretions, if you start making compromise, you
yeah.
start compromising the integrity of the system. But let me come back to some of the things that was said. One of the real principles that I wanted to set up for NASA is to really take a switch from we and they
Hmm.
to we. And it was very important when people came from other countries that the Americans, because it was a U.S. led space, it is a U.S. led space station. And it was very important that everyone felt comfortable. So we went out of our way when we had visitors from the countries participating in the station. And when the astronauts from other countries came and the scientists, we made sure we pushed really hard so people felt welcome. And because we had 16 countries participating, some of them from a confrontation into working together, we needed to reach out and do the things that Nunzia was saying. And I'm very proud of that. And that was one of the, maintaining relationships and an environment for relationships is as important as the design. So I spent a lot of time. I traveled hundreds of thousands of miles a year. I met with the leaderships of countries. I met with the parliaments. I met with the different officials. And it was very tiring, but it was worth it.
Those were very difficult times also in Italy, the beginnings of the 90s. You know, we were political struggles, the First Republic going down. So it was not easy. So relations also with politicians were needed at that time. I know that Dan Goldin did a very good job in those years convincing people to go on with the project that were already ongoing, but they were managed to be shut down because of struggle with money and political issues. So
Yeah,
that
I spent a lot of time in Italy because the head of ASI would ask me to come and meet with the political leadership and try and help them. And I did. I did.
Yeah. Well, my question around that, because you're right. I mean, politics still do have a place and some sort of, I guess, push and pull with space. But at that time, because the mission was oriented more with human and scientific exploration, did you find that it was slightly easier to get people to take hold of that international cooperation and collaborative vein, or what were some of the lessons learned there?
Let me react and say no.
Okay.
Um, Politicians have a basic reactive mode. It's expensive. Why should I spend money on it?
Hmm.
And the biggest issue is helping them understand the impact, the long, it's short term versus long term.
Right.
So helping them go across that chasm from short term to long term, because they all live 95% of their time in the present, and
Hmm.
helping them understand the impact to the future of the Italian society of doing things like this, and how it will impact in a positive sense relationships between countries. There's a new strain between the United States and Russia and the NATO bloc and Russia but yet the International Space Station is operating with
Yeah.
Russians and Europeans and Americans and Canadians and Japanese. So we built a very strong foundation where the roots went deep. And you don't do that without talking about issues
Yeah.
about you have to invest in the future if you want the future to happen. If you want to live in the present and worry about today and tomorrow and next week, you are going to be in trouble for the future. This is the issue that every society has, and the International Space Station was, is, and hopefully will be that catalyst that prevents very bad things from happening and only good things from happening.
Space is really well situated in that way because from a humanity aspect, I mean, I think people have always been thinking about the cosmos and ways to, scientifically progress and for better human exploration, that I would hope that that could be a combining element, geopolitics aside, but it's something that we could align with and like you said, use as a framework from a ISS now moving on to lunar missions with Artemis and future leaning.
What child hasn't looked up at the sky
Exactly.
and wondered?
Well, exactly. And I think that now moving into, and we will shift the conversation a little bit later into this, but moving into the era of Artemis with this very collaborative approach to achieve our collective wish for the future of going back to the moon, onto Mars, it's still competitive in a lot of ways and has its geopolitical pulls and pushes, but it is collaborative. It has to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We always present space activities as the most collaborative space for countries to work in, because very few states, the United States, of course, have the capacity to have a national space program and do it alone. So, also the United States now needs collaborations, more countries to join in to make this program, these Artemis programs, greater than it could be, whether it was, if it was carried out only by the United States. So together with other countries, also with countries like Italy that learned a lot from the United States also, and I can talk for other countries joining the program that learned a lot from the United States in space. So United States with them, with us, will be a much greater program and endeavor. So we are all excited to be part of this. Let me tell you that I participated in the first meetings of the collaboration between Italy and NASA in this program, and I saw engineers from NASA, engineers from ASI, and engineers from the Italian industry working together to cope with the challenges, huge challenges that the lunar environment will
Yeah.
present, which are extremely different from that of the International Space Station. And they always tell me that, for example, on the moon, there will be a much greater exposure to cosmic rays, to cosmic radiation, and to micrometeorites hitting the infrastructures. As well, the excursion of temperature from night and day, and then the gravity on the moon also make a challenge for those who, like the Italians, who are building. Hope to build habitable infrastructure, since they have to organize the internal part of the modules with the top, the down. While in International Space Station, these were not problems at all. So things like that, it is really exciting to see how they work. They are coping with all these challenges together.
Oh, absolutely. And I do want to shift to current collaboration and future. And one piece that I want to point to before going on to Artemis and Mars, but the recent project of impact that happened was DART, which is the double asteroid redirection test. And That was really NASA's space mission aimed at testing a method of planetary defense against near Earth observations. People were calling it the Armageddon movie come to life in a lot of ways. So, Nunzia, from your perspective, I would love to know what Italy's role was. And then, Dan, from yours, I'm curious your take on the importance of the mission and reaction to it, because you've always been a proponent of pushing the boundaries of what is possible for scientific and human space exploration, and keeping us safe and keeping our equipment safe is really critical.
So the DART mission was really a very, very exciting mission for Italians. Italians are very interested in near Earth objects and monitoring them. There is a long tradition in this field. So participating in a first real test of planetary defense, protecting the Earth from a potential impact from an asteroid, it was really incredible. So the role of the role of Italy in this mission was to capture images of the impact. So there was this 6-unit satellites that was released 2 weeks before the impact, and my colleagues from the technical department, they told me that there were 2 incredible challenges to cope with. The one was to be able to reach the appropriate position, to the appropriate distance from the impact, not too close, to avoid being hitting from the material ejecting from the impact, and not too far away to be able to have a good view of the impact. And the second challenge was to be able to turn the camera in a frontal position towards the impact. So these were very huge challenges for us. That was the first planet deep space mission for Italy. So this very small spacecraft was able to autonomously detect the target and reach it at the distance of 58 kilometers. 55 was the perfect one, but we reached the 58 kilometers, and 3 minutes after the impact took place. So the camera took lots of images, and they helped also NASA to understand what happened on the surface of this Dimorphos second asteroid of the Didymos binary system.
Yeah, it was stunning.
Very exciting.
Wow. Dan, what was your reaction to it?
My reaction was too little, not enough, and that what I'm concerned about is it was a one-off, and there is unbelievable opportunity and there's unbelievable peril in near Earth. So let me break it into 2 parts. While we are driving to mine for rare earths and electronic materials and precious metals and construction materials on Earth, which ends up being necessity, but it does create problems with water in the land. There is a cornucopia of opportunity in the near Earth asteroids. If you just take a look at what's there and what we've surveyed, that to me is true commercial space. Commercial space, when companies work to reduce the operating cost for the US government, is one thing. True commerce is going to occur when we're doing manufacturing, construction, mining. And then on the other hand, those objects could strike Earth. So one of the things that I would like to see, I'm no longer in charge of anything, I make suggestions. I was hoping that the DART mission would inspire more of the building of an international observation early warning system to protect the planet with the right kind of in-space and on-ground sensors, and to begin to develop real systems based upon what we learned from DART, such that we then 10, 20 years from now will have a true system to protect the planet. So DART was fabulous, but what has to now happen is there needs to be, now that people understand that this is a feasibility, don't celebrate with champagne and forget about it, but lean forward into future missions. And from my standpoint, I think there needs to be a better balance and an intense focus on the moon, and then to Mars blurs the ability of humanity to reap the opportunities of space and get us to become a true spacefaring nation and planet, and the economic opportunities for young people, for governments, for having a cleaner planet will be unbelievable. So I hate making a downer, but I want to make an upper and say DART proved the point. Now we ought to build upon what happened with DART. There are some companies that are looking at asteroid mining. And then on the 50th anniversary of landing on the moon, I wrote an op-ed in Aviation Week, and this is what I talked about.
Yeah.
I talked about the near-Earth asteroids.
It's an important distinction to make because I just gave a talk recently about different technological challenges that are going to unlock commerce opportunities in LEO. And, the launch equation is going to happen. We are going to have cheaper, reliable, ubiquitous launch to space at some point in the recent future. And to your point about in orbit servicing and manufacturing and capabilities of satellite maneuvering, there's a lot of necessity to keep that infrastructure and those assets safe. And I have no doubt that the technological piece will get there. It's the human piece that you know intimately well. That's
the barrier.
That is the barrier a lot of times.
But I'll tell you, I'm working with two exciting startup space companies that I believe when their stuff gets done, it's going to transform the price of the cost of space. Big savings. So this is what gives me pleasure, working with these brilliant young people, helping them do transformational things. I'm now looking for some companies that are interested in doing mining operations in the asteroid belt near Earth.
Yeah, what I've seen, and this also goes to the work that ASI and NASA does, is that this resurgence of interest in space. We talked about interest in space has always been there, but I think people are now realizing that there is a real heritage for them to take advantage of space, whether it's operating in those conditions, exploiting those conditions for use back on Earth. And that really comes from a lot of what NASA and ASI are really pushing in this Artemis mission with lunar outposts and moon to Mars. And so I would love to talk a little bit about that, because NASA and ASI still very much set this North Star of what should be looked at in space, where the missions are going, where the interest is. And so talking specifically about Artemis, and then we'll shift more to Lunar Gateway and Moon to Mars, but there is a bilateral cooperation agreement for lunar surf multi-purpose habitat modules, which I'm assuming are taking a lot of the precedent from the ISS and putting them in a different environment. So Nunzia, I'd love for you to be able to comment on that. And then Dan, I'd love your perspective on the lunar outpost and the lunar economy at large.
Sure.
Well, the agreement that you mentioned, it's for a preliminary study. So it's a study. It's ongoing. There are no fixed information that we can provide because it's still all in the making. As I told you, engineers are working together to see how to best understand which can be the uses of this possible multi-purpose habitation module on the moon, NPH they call it. So which uses, which functionality should have, which are the enabling technologies that will allow for the development of this module on the moon. So the activity is huge. I told you the challenges are huge, but the work is really exciting, as it was before for the International Space Station, as it was before for the space lab on the space shuttle. So Italian built on this previous collaboration, and of course they are eager to exploit their knowledge, their know-how, their competencies, possibly on an equal basis now, since the experience we gained on all this cooperation. So we are extremely excited to see how it goes on, this collaboration. But of course, you told me that we're going to touch also the Lunar Gateway. But on the bilateral, it's still a study ongoing, a preliminary study for the development of this multi-purpose habitation module, and we are looking forward to go public someday with some more details.
That's wonderful.
Let me say, I want to talk about keeping our eye on the prize. The prize is not building all these things on the moon. The prize is understanding what's in the moon rocks. The challenge is, how can we live off the land? And we won't learn if we could live off the land until we know we could get hydrogen and oxygen from the rocks. We could get the right kind of elements and minerals. We could use it to make habitats.
Mm-hmm.
We can use it to make the tools that we need. And most of all, we could get an energy source to come back to Earth and not have to have all these transfers. My concern is, and I'll go back to Space Station Freedom, the total focus on Space Station Freedom was on the excitement and the contracts and the building of the space station. When I came to NASA after they spent the full budget on Space Station Freedom, there wasn't one piece of hardware 8 years later when it was supposed to be on orbit.
Mm.
So the concern that I have and the caution that I provide to everybody is the people of Italy and the people of America work very hard to make those contributions. And what I see, nobody's bad, but my concern is there's too much focus on building the infrastructure and not enough focus on the science that the infrastructure is being built for. And if they do it right, it will be transformational, and the moon could become a launch base to go to the rest of the solar system. And also, there could be some incredible commercial opportunities. And I keep coming back to government as a catalyst to catalyze commercial activity. And if we put too much focus on Artemis and the building and don't bring in commercial thought, we're going to lose the bubble. So, I'm not trying to be a downer. I'm trying to be a capitalist.
Yeah.
And unless you have that capitalist focus where you partner government with industry for the benefit of being able to make goods and products and build wonderful places, we could then begin to make science fiction a reality. That's what my life is about.
Science will be integrated in the study very soon, at least in this bilateral cooperation. We already mentioned this to our science department, and so the intention is there because we know that infrastructure without science doesn't make sense, of course.
I hear you, but watch what happens. Beware. There's such an intense focus on building infrastructure, the science gets lost. And I want to add one more thought. Everything is about physics and engineering. You mentioned the high cosmic radiation. Biology must come in, and we must use modern biology that we've learned, like gene splicing. Very important. We must, how should I say it, build radiation resistant astronauts. It is not impossible. And there's a researcher at Harvard that has Dr. Church. He's put out quite a few papers. There are things one could do with gene splicing, with osteoporosis and bone loss in lower gravity, and with radiation resistance, and then figuring out in 1/6 the gravitational field, how do you grow food?
Yeah.
So there's so much opportunity, and having been engaged in the process through multiple projects, I watch from the outside. I don't know the details, but I would say if I was planning, I'd have 20 to 30% of the budget focused on why we're there, not on building the infrastructure.
I love the pragmatic approach because you brought up a lot commercialization of space and this low Earth economy, lunar economy, but really there's two elements that you touched upon. It's the sustainability of it, but it's also taking Earth out of the equation of being able to space for space,
Cut
right?
the cord.
Yeah, conduct things in space, be able to grow things in space, manufacture in space, because a lot of people take for granted the reentry equation is really difficult. And if you're going to be reliant on sending things up and back, you're truly not going to be able to enable the commercialization opportunities that are available to us in the future.
It's going to just be a major contribution to the economy. And I truly believe if we do Artemis right on an international basis, it'll spike the economy because we will get the first true commercialization of space
Hmm.
from Artemis if we do it right. I'm an old curmudgeon that keeps hawking back to old principles of capitalism. It's good.
Well, but there's something to be said because, Mark Twain says that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And there's a lot of things that we can learn from the past that we see come up in iterations and in markets and capitalistic cycles and scientific cycles.
To go back to what Mr. Goldin was saying about truly exploiting this Artemis program, but coming from other workshop on the Artemis that I mentioned offline, um, the need for justifying what we're doing also towards the moon is still there for many countries. We still need to explain which are the potential benefits for us, for humanity, to go off Earth, on the moon and on Mars. So we still have to pay attention to this and to always try to bring those benefits to Earth as much as possible, whenever we can.
Absolutely. And I know that Italy has a focus on this with your work on the Lunar Gateway and Moon to Mars. Would you like to touch upon that a bit?
Yeah, also, as I was saying, we're also part of the European Space Agency, and NASA and the European Space Agency has this bilateral cooperation within the framework of the Artemis program for the collaboration on the building up of this cislunar orbiting station called Lunar Gateway. So ESA will be very much a prominent actor of this collaboration, and Italy through the European Space Agency as usual. So we're already very well involved in the development of the international habitat that will be the main habitable module for astronauts. Actually, an Italian industry is the prime contractor for this development, but we're also participating in the other element called ESPRI, which will provide other elements to this cislunar station, which will be also used as a kind of a reference station for those who will go to the moon for a short period of time and then will need to go back, or have will need to have assistance from the cislunar orbiting space. So it would be a very important element of the infrastructure of the Artemis program, this cislunar gateway, and we're very happy that ESA and Italy through ESA will be part of it.
I think when I think of the cislunar gateway, I think back to the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was science fiction, Arthur C. Clarke. And I remember on their way, they stopped off at a lunar gateway.
Hmm.
And this was science fiction decades ago. And here in my lifetime, I'm seeing the gateway occurring, and I'm only hoping the gateway could host space explorers from other places going to the moon. So it's just an amazing time that we're living in, and bringing in the private sector to work with governments to make this happen. I keep coming back to this because it's really important that this not be looked upon as a government program.
Hmm.
It brings in the commercial sector because they're going to see things that are going to make it so much better. And usually the conversation is always at the government level, but the opportunity for humanity on Earth to become truly a space society is with this lunar gateway and the Artemis program opening up the door.
Yeah, the private sector really offers an agility and like you said, new ways of doing business, new ways of seeing things that is really critical if we're going to experience this sort of exponential growth and opportunity.
Well, the other thing that's important is there are some very powerful and competent, excellent existing companies, and they're working with new space.
Yeah.
So the other nice thing that's happening here is there's a melding of skills and opportunities. And you know, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, they're just super great companies. And I think the new space companies working with these established companies, they're both moving towards a much more productive center. So I just see great things out of this Lunar Gateway program.
It's a process ongoing, and the money needed is huge. So this is not easy for all countries to. I mean, in Italy, we still are in the process of developing this new space, and for the moment, the big money comes from the state. So this is why for us it's still a governmental activity. But of course, we will see the process how it will develop, and this Artemis program will surely help in this development. We're sure of that.
Yeah. Yeah, the government's going to have to do a lot of lifting, but I'm just trying to point out when you have partnership between the established industry, the new industry, and government, good things happen.
Absolutely. And as we're running up on our time, which is unfortunate because I know there's so much more we could unpack, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you guys both this question since I have you captive live. But really quickly, what are your views for the future? So you laid out a lot of the things, but what gets you the most excited? What kind of wisdom or advice would you impart on the audience when thinking about the need for scientific exploration, political collaboration, geopolitical, tolerance, anything of that nature?
The vision is important. And if we just keep the focus on the moon and don't take a look at the opportunities, Mars is out there. I've been interested in Mars since I was 7 years old and
I
went to
read
the
that in your
Hayden
bio.
Planet and I went to the Hayden Planetarium. So it's great, but we need to have a broad vision, and that vision says we're leaving Earth and we're going to have a multi-planetary society because it's going to benefit all of us.
Hmm.
The space industry will be the catalytic agent to the transformation of the future. So there's opportunity in a broader sense for all us Earthlings. That's where I see it.
That's wonderful. Nunzia?
My vision is pretty similar. I want just to stress on the space activities again to be a force of unity among all states, all actors on Earth. So my vision is to see all the countries of the earth all united, well, united also independently, but coordinating or collaborating in different ways, but all involved in this humans going off Earth towards the other planets and all collaborate together, helping together to improve whenever it's possible life of human beings in this universe was. Yeah, that's my vision.
Oh, it's wonderful. And I think to tie this discussion in a bow, that the partnership between NASA and ASI really has set a really great groundwork and a framework for others to follow, because there has been collaboration since 1964. So the future is going to be very interesting to watch. And I think that, with the technological exponential growth, we're just going to see so much more in our lifetimes that we can posture, but are going to be beyond hypothesis at this point. So I want to thank you both, Nunzia and Dan, for sharing your time and expertise with us. I've really enjoyed this discussion, and I know our listeners have as well. For those of you viewing, our next Spazio conversation will be on July 20th, and it'll talk about Italian new space, where you will get to meet some of the most cutting-edge Italian startups that are poised to change the landscape of both the European and global space sectors. So please stay tuned in. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you.